Hello everyone, Andrew Meet Rich here. We've got a packed lineup today, and trust me, you're going to want to hear every word of this. Let's dive straight in, because what's happening right now in Britain, across Europe, and around the world is absolutely critical. And I'm going to start with something that's causing quite a stir in the United Kingdom. I worked inside one of the biggest media outlets you've ever heard of, watched firsthand how narratives got shaped and twisted to serve agendas, and I chose to walk away. Now I'm on my own, answerable to nobody but you, and I bring you the real story behind the headlines. So if you're finding value in what I do here, hit that like button, smash subscribe, and if you really want to support independent journalism that refuses to bow to corporate pressure, consider becoming a channel sponsor. It means the world to me, and it keeps this operation going strong. Now let's talk about King Charles and what's unfolding in the British royal family, because this is where we're starting today. King Charles and Queen Camilla have just arrived in Vatican City for what's being called a historic visit. The stated purpose? Strengthening ties between the Anglican and Catholic churches. And here's the kicker. At noon, there's going to be a joint prayer in the Sistine Chapel. This is the first time since the Reformation, we're talking centuries here, that the heads of these two Christian churches are coming together in prayer like this. Charles will become the first head of the Anglican Church to publicly pray alongside the Pope, symbolically demonstrating unity with the Catholic Church. During his time in Rome, Charles is also expected to officially receive a new title and honor. But here's what they're not highlighting in the glossy press releases. This visit is happening against the backdrop of yet another wave of intense scrutiny on the British royal family. And it's all because of Prince Andrew's connections to Epstein. That scandal has been haunting the king's brother for years now, and it's not going away. In fact, it's actively damaging Charles's reputation, which, let's be honest, isn't exactly stellar to begin with. For reasons that baffle many observers, Charles just doesn't command the same authority in Britain as his predecessors did. So while the Vatican visit is being framed as this grand gesture of religious unity, there's a much messier reality bubbling underneath. Now, why does any of this matter? Because the optics are everything in monarchy, and right now, the optics are terrible. You've got a king trying to project moral and spiritual leadership, while his own brother is tangled in one of the most disturbing scandals of our time. And the British public isn't blind to it. They see the contradiction. They see the palace trying to move forward while dragging this anchor of scandal behind them. So when you hear about this historic prayer in the Sistine Chapel, ask yourself, is this really about faith and unity, or is it a carefully choreographed distraction from the rot within the institution itself? All right, let's pivot to the broader European situation because there's a lot happening, and none of it is particularly comforting. The European Union is ramping up internal security measures, and the European Commission, under Ursula von der Leyen's leadership, has just ordered the development of enhanced security protocols for the entire institution. They're reinforcing meeting halls, conducting regular security drills, the whole 9 yards. Why? Because fear is intensifying. The leadership in Brussels is visibly anxious, and that anxiety is translating into concrete action. And speaking of action, the European Union has just approved its 19th sanctions package against Russia. Now, this one's interesting. According to this decision, short-term contracts for liquefied natural gas will cease in 6 months. Long-term contracts? Those won't end until January 1st, 2027. But here's the thing. The full ban is coming a year earlier than the European Commission's original roadmap outlined. That's an acceleration, and accelerations like that don't happen without significant pressure behind the scenes. Also part of this 19th package, a ban on supplying Russia with toilets, bidets, and other plumbing products. Yes, you heard that right. Toilets. Now, EU leaders have gathered in Brussels for a summit, and the agenda is hefty. They're discussing the use of frozen Russian assets, climate goals, achieving carbon neutrality, and here's a big one, the ban on selling new cars with internal combustion engines by 2035. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico have both been vocal critics of the EU's legislation on this issue, and ahead of the summit, they met to discuss the future of the auto industry in more detail. And let's be real here. The situation is pretty grim. The European auto industry is struggling, jobs are disappearing, and the transition to electric vehicles is proving far more complicated and costly than anyone wanted to admit. For the first time, EU leaders are also addressing the housing crisis. And folks, this is severe. Property prices across Europe have surged by an average of 48%. Rent? up 22%. People are being priced out of homes, out of cities, out of stability. Young families can't afford to buy. Workers can't afford to rent. This is a crisis that's been building for years, and it's finally forcing its way onto the agenda. We'll be watching closely to see what conclusions they draw from this meeting, if any real action follows, or if it's just more talk. Let me rehook you here for a second, because what's happening in Germany right now is deeply concerning, and you need to hear this. The bird flu situation in Germany is getting worse, significantly worse. The spread is accelerating across the country, and experts are calling this an unprecedented outbreak. So far, around 2,000 wild birds have been confirmed lost, and on farms, over 160,000 birds have had to be eliminated to prevent further spread. And here's the scary part. Experts say there's no end in sight. Why is this happening now? Well, it's fall, and migratory birds are arriving in new resting areas every single day. Bird flu spreads primarily through wild birds, so as these migrations continue, the virus hops from flock to flock, region to region. It's a cascading problem, and containment is proving nearly impossible. So we're watching, waiting to see what comes next, because if this continues escalating, it's not just an agricultural issue, it becomes a public health concern. Now here's something that might surprise you. After the so-called shutdown in the United States affected 12,000 civilian employees of the U.S. Armed Forces stationed in Germany, people who work on military bases there, the German government has stepped in to ensure they get paid. This came after a demand from the VERDI trade union, and frankly, Berlin didn't have much choice. The federal government is now allocating additional funds to guarantee that these workers receive their October salaries on time. It's an unusual situation, one that highlights just how interconnected and frankly how fragile some of these transatlantic arrangements really are. And here's a bizarre story out of Germany that's got people talking. The police union is furious. Former Chancellor Olaf Scholz has an apartment in Hamburg that he barely uses because he's lived in Potsdam for years. But that apartment? It's under 24-hour security protection. The cost of that protection has already run into several millions of euros. When Scholz's office was asked about it, they claimed the apartment is used regularly. But the reality? It sits empty. Taxpayers are footing a multi-million-euro bill to guard an empty apartment. If that doesn't make you question how public money gets spent, I don't know what will. If you're getting value from this deep dive, do me a favor, drop a like, hit subscribe, and leave a comment below. Let me know what you think about all of this, because your engagement keeps this channel alive and thriving. Now let's head to France, because what's happening there is frankly shocking. Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy has been in custody since Tuesday, as you probably know. And his first night in a Paris prison? It was anything but peaceful. The night was filled with crude insults and threats. Inmates, clearly coordinated, were shouting and hurling vulgar abuse at him, and here's where it gets even more outrageous. These scenes were deliberately broadcast live on TikTok. This was a setup, plain and simple, and it happened with the clear permission of the authorities. It's a public humiliation, orchestrated from the inside. Now, nothing that happens in France surprises anyone anymore, but this is a new low. Over in Poland, former Prime Minister Leszek Miller has made a provocative proposal. He's suggesting that Poland send back to Ukraine the draft-age Ukrainian men currently living in Poland. His reasoning? He finds it strange that millions of young men left Ukraine and are refusing to fight for their own country. That's how he put it. Miller even proposed that Polish law enforcement could handle the detention of these Ukrainians. This topic is starting to gain serious traction in Polish media, so we're going to keep a close eye on how this develops, because it could become a major flashpoint. And just to round out the European picture, experts are issuing warnings for Germany, France, and other Western European countries. They're saying that in the coming days, the region will fall under a zone of low pressure, and there's a risk of what's being called a bomb cyclone or a weather bomb. All right, now we need to talk about what's happening in the United States, because this is generating massive headlines everywhere. President Donald Trump has, for the first time during his second term, imposed sanctions against Russia. The United States is introducing large-scale sanctions targeting two of Russia's biggest oil corporations. This announcement came from Trump himself during a meeting at the White House with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Dozens of subsidiary companies are also being sanctioned. Trump expressed hope that this decision will help bring an end to the conflict in Ukraine. When journalists asked why the sanctions were being introduced now, Trump's answer was simple. He said he had a feeling that the time was right. Now, we'll see how events unfold from here, but the intrigue remains. The timing raises questions, the motivations are unclear, and the impact is yet to be determined. There's also been a notable reaction to the coalition under Benjamin Netanyahu pushing for the full annexation of the West Bank. Netanyahu himself has cautiously voiced support for annexation in the past, but now U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has issued a warning. He stated that moves by the Israeli parliament toward annexing the occupied West Bank, that's the exact phrasing used, threaten Washington's plan to end the conflict in Gaza. Rubio made it clear this is not something the United States can support right now. He said this before departing for Israel. Rubio's visit follows trips by U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and 2 special envoys. Vance also sharply criticized Israel's intention to annex the West Bank. Trump himself is planning to visit Gaza at some point, so again, the intrigue continues. There's a lot of positioning happening here, a lot of competing interests, and it's far from clear how this resolves. Now let me bring you something that speaks to the future, and it's a future that's arriving faster than most people realize. Amazon, the world's largest e-commerce company, is preparing for massive automation. The company plans to replace more than 600,000 jobs with robots in the coming years. You heard that correctly, 600,000 jobs. The main goal? Automate up to 75% of processes. The first high-tech fulfillment center is already operational in Louisiana, where thousands of robots are handling packaging and delivery tasks. This has already allowed the company to cut its workforce by a quarter. These are the changes coming, whether we're ready or not. It's unclear yet whether these plans will impact European divisions, but let's be honest, the writing is on the wall. Robots are beginning to steadily, confidently replace human workers. This is only the beginning, and unfortunately, the number of unemployed people is going to grow year after year. Let me remind you of what we've covered today because it's a lot, and it all connects. We started with King Charles and Queen Camilla's historic visit to the Vatican, a symbolic gesture of unity overshadowed by the ongoing Epstein scandal involving Prince Andrew, a stain that continues to damage the royal family's credibility. Then we moved to Europe, where the EU is tightening internal security, rolling out its 19th sanctions package against Russia with accelerated timelines on natural gas bans, and grappling with a housing crisis that has property prices soaring 48% and rents up 22%. EU leaders are also debating the future of the auto industry and the 2035 ban on internal combustion engines, all while Germany faces an unprecedented bird flu outbreak with over 160,000 birds eliminated and no end in sight. We discussed Germany stepping in to pay US military employees after the American shutdown, the outrage over millions spent guarding Olaf Scholz's empty apartment, and the shocking treatment of Nicolas Sarkozy in a French prison where his humiliation was broadcast live on TikTok. In Poland, calls are growing to send draft-age Ukrainian men back to Ukraine, a proposal gaining media attention. Then we turned to the United States, where Trump imposed his first Russia sanctions of his second term, targeting major oil corporations, and where Secretary of State Marco Rubio warned Israel against annexing the West Bank, complicating U.S. efforts in Gaza. Finally, we looked at Amazon's plan to replace over 600,000 workers with robots, a stark signal of the automation wave that's going to reshape the job market in ways we're only beginning to understand. So here's my final thought. Every single one of these stories, from the royal scandals to the robot revolution, from sanctions and geopolitics to housing crises and outbreaks, they're all connected by one thread: power. Who has it, who's losing it, and what they're willing to do to keep it or take it back. We're living through a period of unprecedented change, and the decisions being made right now in Brussels, in Washington, in Jerusalem, in corporate boardrooms, they're going to shape the world for decades to come. If this kind of analysis resonates with you, if you want to keep seeing content that cuts through the noise and tells you what's really happening, then please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and if you're in a position to do so, consider becoming a sponsor. Your support makes this possible. It keeps me independent. It keeps me free to tell the truth without fear or favor. Drop a comment below. Let me know what you think, where you're watching from, what concerns you most about everything we've covered today. I read every single comment, and your input genuinely shapes the conversations we have here. Stay sharp, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next one.